Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today, our episode is focused on how to build wealth with a bias to say yes. And we thought this was a great subject to bring up with you guys because we haven't always had a bias to say yes. In fact, we've had a bias to say no. And I think it's probably a natural thing that most of us have. But I think over time, we've shifted to say yes more and more. And it has resulted in a lot of really cool things for us. And so we wanted to bring this topic to all of you and discuss about whether or not you would want to shift over time to have more of a bias to say yes.
Yeah, I wanted to give a little bit of context here. What are we talking about when we say a bias to say yes? So what we're talking about here is that whenever you have opportunities presented to you, it doesn't have to be real estate opportunities, but it could be just an invitation to a party, let's say, right? And so the question is, what is your bias in that situation? Do you have a bias to say no, or do you have a bias to say yes? It doesn't mean you say one or the other. It's just that what's your initial reaction? Is your initial reaction to say no, and then later on you think about it and eventually say yes? Or is it like an immediate yes, right? That's the question. Or is it an immediate no and then you kind of change over time. But anyway, that's kind of the idea here is that, what is your bias when you are presented with opportunities?
Yeah, and so just reflecting on back on us, I think in general, I've had a lifetime bias to say yes. It became even more so after I had my divorce, my first divorce or my only divorce. And I decided that I was making a lot of decisions out of fear and set the intention that I was no longer going to make decisions out of fear. And I think that actually led me to say yes a lot more. And I think you've actually had a bias to say no in general.
Mhm.
And it's been an interesting an interesting way to have a relationship, right? With one of us always saying, yes, 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 let's do it. And one of us looking at the downsides and being a lot more thoughtful and having a lot more of a immediate bias to say no. Sometimes it can bring up some tensions and sometimes it actually will result in us kind of changing our plan too. So let's dive in here. Let's talk about the bias to say yes versus the bias to say no and what you want to do, right? Because there's no right way here. It's just a discussion of what fits for you at this time in your life.
Yeah, so when we start, let's talk about like why we tend to say no, and that's perfect for me, right? Because that was my bias. And I remember a time when Leti was like, "Hey, let's go to Europe for a month," right? She always comes with like this, this excitement, and I'm immediately skeptical, and I think also there's probably some type of a fear going on of like fear of change, fear of like disruption, fear of like the unknown, also
And
like
probably also just, thinking through all the things
the
that it's going to
logistics,
take, the
right?
logistics to make it happen, right? Like when I suggested when I was like 30 weeks pregnant to go to Hawaii for 6 weeks, you also immediately said no, I think because you were thinking of all the things that needed to be done and the risks of going and doing something like that.
Yeah, I think there was like the financial commitment to it because like going to Hawaii, this was like during COVID for like we were planning to go there for like a month or 6 weeks or something like that. There's the financial commitment, there's the logistics, there's, figuring out well we'd have to take everybody. We had like two nannies at that time, so we had to take everybody with us. And so it was just kind of this like big logistical thing.
Mhm.
And I guess I immediately started thinking about all those things instead of like what could be really good about it, right? So my bias for sure on both of those instances was an immediate no.
Yeah. So how did I get to you to yes?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that you said to me was, are you really going to remember spending a month in Seattle at the time? That's where we were living. Are
In
you gonna,
January and February.
yeah. Are you gonna remember spending another January or February in Seattle? And for those of you guys don't know, it tends to be a little bit dark, a little bit dreary. And so, are we gonna remember that, or are we gonna remember the time that we went to Hawaii for 6 weeks, right? And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Uh, we only live once, and this is a lifetime experience, and like we could be close to your parents. Like, yeah, there were so many other reasons. So once you kind of got me thinking about all the great things about it, then a lot of those fears, the details, the logistics, all that kind of went out the window.
Yeah. And same with the one I suggested going to Europe too, the same thing, right?
Right. So yeah, but the important thing here is that not everybody has this counterbalance, right? Not everybody has this person who has a bias to say yes, right? Versus me, if I were just running my own ship here, I think in those situations I would tend to say no, right? And I think then if I think about it, it'd be really sad because would have missed out on an amazing time that we had in Europe, a completely memorable and very, very valuable time in Hawaii. I say valuable because that was the month where I started running actually.
Mhm.
So I hadn't been exercising. I gained a lot of weight. It was actually during COVID,
Mhm.
and it was just like I was just so sick of it, right? I was just like so sick of like carrying the extra weight and having that dad bod. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. And there was no excuse. It was beautiful. I could run on the beach. It was Kailua Beach. I was like, the weather was amazing. I wake up really early, like 5 in the morning. I go on these amazing runs with the sunrise, and from that day on, like all of a sudden, my health and my body is completely transformed, and it was all because of that trip. It was all because I eventually said yes.
Yeah, so I think some of the keys here are, a lot of times we say no because of fear or because of perceived work or effort or things that it's going to take a little bit more energy, and we're focused on the downsides. We don't see any of the upsides, and I think tendency is to stay the same, right, and to not change things, right, and if we're comfortable, just to stay where we are and not to move if we don't need to, but the flip side is there can be lots of really incredible things that come out of it. And so when you start to open yourself up to the possibilities of the incredible things that could come out of it, then you start to have a more balanced picture of what's possible. And you still have I think the momentum to kind of stay the same. Like that's actually the momentum, is to stay the same and not do anything different. But if you start to get excited about all the possibilities, that's when you can start to kind of get out of the rut that you're in and start to see the potential for other things. And I have to say, one of the things that our friend Sunny Smith, as many of you guys know her, of Empowering Women Physicians, she actually did this to me once, which was so helpful. Is I was debating something and I was thinking about not doing something, and a lot of it was the finances of it. And she said to me, you've grown so much, like, why wouldn't you also grow what you're spending on your personal development? And so that was just kind of also, I think I was stuck in that decision, but I wasn't looking to how I had already shifted, how it already made a difference, and what was potentially possible for me. So I wasn't looking into the future and seeing those upsides of what could come out of it.
Yeah, and we see this oftentimes, people who are deciding to take our course, signing up for our mastermind, EB Pro, and ultimately, that decision, it's a very personal decision. But what oftentimes what I see oftentimes that they're not necessarily doing is that they're kind of immediately going to the no because of the fear, maybe the money, the cost.
But also that because they're like, oh, I can do it later, right? I'll
Right.
do it someday. And that is also a risk, I have to say, because then you're putting things off, and you're like, yes, I want to do it, but I'll do it someday. And then that someday never comes.
Right, right. And then the cost of that is, you're not making that shift or that major change, you're kind of and I don't want to talk about like fear of missing out, but there's potentially a missed opportunity as well, right? And so I think that and we've been talking about personal examples here, but if we think about the real estate context, there are so many opportunities that come across your desk. And part of it is you have to be open to it. And part of it is you have to, when they do come, you have to have that bias to say yes. Now, one thing I really wanted to emphasize here is that uh, just because you have a bias to say yes doesn't mean that you say yes to everything.
Everything. Yeah.
That's really important, right? And what we're talking about here is when you have a bias to say yes, then you have the curiosity to ask more questions about it, right? Ask kind of like, well, tell me more about it. Let me sit down and talk to you, find out more about the opportunity, right? And so it's a perfect example of like our course or our mastermind, like just to say no without actually spending, the 20 to 30 minutes, like sitting down, talking to me, or maybe to one of our coaches about EB Pro to find out what their experiences are, right? So it's like kind of going in with that curiosity of like, what's this about? I want to learn more about it instead of just shutting down and immediately saying no.
Right. And so one of the things that I think about that really helps me decide if it's a yes or no time is I think about the armchair test, which is you're sitting in your armchair, you're sitting in your rocking chair, and you're 85, and you're looking back, would you have regretted that you didn't say yes to that opportunity? And so that is part of what convinced me also that time I had that discussion with Sunny, and I was like, should I go and enroll in this other mastermind? It's cost a lot more money. And as I put it through the rocking chair test, or the armchair test, and I said, of course, I'm going to totally regret that I didn't do this when I'm 85. I think I probably use that on you as well with Europe, and going to Europe in the summer, because it was like, are we going to regret that we had this opportunity and we didn't at least try it? And one of the keys is, I think people think that when they try it, it's like permanent and they don't have any other option and they can't pivot. You can always pivot. You can try something. If it's not working, you figure something else out, and you can always pivot and change. If I enrolled in that mastermind and it wasn't the right fit for me, I do it for a year and then I stop. Like, it's not like I'm enrolled for the rest of my life. Like, and of course, something amazing is going to come out of it no matter what, because I'm going to go in looking for something amazing, and I'm going to make something amazing coming out of it, because I'm going to get, my value, and I'm going to show up and I'm going to do my part. And so it was like inevitable that something good was going to come out of it because I was going to make it. So it was like a really silly battle in my head. But once I did that armchair test, and once I considered all the potential really good things that would come out of it, it was like a heck yes. And then not only that, I've been doing it for like 4 years now. Like, I've stayed in it for 4 years. And why? Because every year I'm like, oh, maybe I should quit. And every year I'm like, oh, I got so much value out of it last year. Why would I quit? And so I continue to do it. And so that's just one example of something you can use, is that armchair test or that rocking chair test when you're thinking about something and saying, hey, do I really want to say yes to it? I think it helps you make that decision.
Yeah, we really want to stress the importance of this thought process of going deeper and really kind of asking those types of questions. And I'll give you an example. There was this is our mastermind group, and I offered an opportunity to participate in a syndication to one of the EB pros. And there was this kind of immediate bias to no. And actually, that was the answer, was just an email saying, no, this is not really something I'm interested in. But there was no follow-up questions or follow-up investigation about what the opportunity really was and what the opportunity would actually mean. And ultimately, there was this bias against syndications just in general. Like, it was almost like if it was a bad word. But what I was really offering was the opportunity to become the type of person who could go out and fundraise, and this is just a valuable skill. And the other part of it, which was less important, at least in my mind, but could have been very important to them, was the opportunity to make significant amount of money. By participating in a syndication, you can actually make 150 to $250,000 if you can raise somewhere like 1.5 to $2 million. And so there was a significant financial opportunity there as well. But the person said no immediately, shut it down, no further questions, and no further investigation. And I think it was a missed opportunity, right? But anyway, I just want to kind of share that example because this was a real life example of somebody who kind of stopped the conversation at no, and didn't kind of take it further.
And we've done that so many times. I think about how we used to have limiting beliefs about
Mhm.
partnerships, and how we would just shut down even considering working with people in partnerships on rental properties, for example, and how much that limited our growth. We didn't even consider it because we had a belief that partnerships were risky, that they never worked out, all these beliefs around them that would allow us to not actually ask any questions, to not even explore something. It was immediate no. And it all became because of our beliefs that we did not question, and we did not, ask those questions with an open mind because we didn't have an open mind.
Yeah, that's true. And I wanted to also mention that another example there, back in 2017, around that time, we were looking at buying a bigger property, and it was in Arizona. And we felt that at that time it was just like too big of a property.
Mm.
Maybe it was more me saying no,
No, I
but
didn't. I didn't.
it
Yeah, I wasn't
was.
ready either.
Yeah, but it was just like a lot of limiting beliefs about taking on this bigger property. I think for me, it was just fear of the unknown, fear of something, way too big outside of my comfort zone. And so I remember saying no to that opportunity. But that opportunity, I know what happened to that opportunity. It was actually a really amazing deal. The returns on that thing were incredible, and so that was a missed opportunity for us for sure.
So I've already introduced you guys to the armchair, the rocking chair test is one way to kind of consider it. I think the other one is to think about relationships. So many times we've said to all of you in this podcast, in our courses and everything, relationships are the most valuable thing that you can get. Like, I mean, a good relationship can open doors, can bring in so many opportunities, can result in thinking differently. One conversation with one individual will change your life. And so this is the other time to really think about always saying yes, is a new relationship, a deepening of relationship with someone that that you already like. Those types of opportunities to form new relationships or create deeper relationships are almost always good things will come out of them. Like, I can't think of an example of when it wouldn't bring something really incredible. And so this is me speaking to myself right now because I was trying to decide, should I go to a birthday party, that involves me flying, across the country for one single day, because I want to be home for the kids on the weekend. Do I do it? And you know what? The answer is yes, I should do this because it's the relationship with that person. It's the relationship with the people I might meet. You never know what's going to come out of it. And so I extremely rarely ever say no to new phone calls with new individuals and going and meeting people and deepening relationships.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I had the same instance, right? End of the month, I was looking at a gathering, more of a sporting event, and my initial bias was no, right? Because of that is literally across the country. That's a big trip, just to get there, just for a weekend. And
Right.
but then ultimately, I decided yes,
Yes,
more
and I
recently.
mean, and just to give you guys another simple example is I was thinking about hosting a dinner party this weekend, and I was like, I don't think so. I don't want to do it. But man, it doesn't mean that I have to cook dinner. It doesn't mean that I have to do a lot of work. I can literally find ways to make it easier, and I could totally have people over. And again, I just don't say no to phone calls and relationships and building deeper connections with people because you never know where it's going to lead.
Mhm.
So I think overall, what we've given you is just why we have a strong bias towards saying yes. Some of the questions that we ask ourselves that allow us to be able to say yes more frequently, looking at the upsides, potential upsides on something, thinking about the armchair or the rocking chair test, is it a relationship? Is it a deepening relationship or a new relationship? And it's something that's going to make us grow. I think that's the last question that we really think about a lot is it going to involve some personal growth? Are we going to come out of it better people? Kenji is doing a lot of sporting events this year, a lot of really tough ones, ones that will really have him grow. And those are the types of things that he is going to be remembering when he's older that are going to form relationships because he's going, with some of his friends that he, will end up with deeper relationships going through
That's right.
this challenge together. And absolutely, who knows what's going to come out of it with meeting somebody new or hearing a conversation that changes the course of his life. And so those types of things, really you should say yes to. And remember, when you're saying no, just really question, is it fear holding you back? And
Mhm.
do you want to make decisions based out of fear? This is something that I ask myself a lot. Is it fear holding me back? Am I making decisions based out of fear? And if you reflect right now, there might be something that you really want to do that you're holding yourself back from and you haven't done. And if you find the root of that is fear, I'd encourage you to really do it because courage is having fear and doing it anyway. We do things that draw on our courage all the time. All the time. We are always pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. Business requires an incredible amount of courage, and there is an incredible amount of innate fear with business, with building business, with trying new things. And so it is a practice that you continue to push yourself and put yourself in a courageous space to be able to move forward, because gosh, so much fear comes up whenever you're faced with decisions or new things to do that you've never done before.
Hosting a conference, right? I mean, it's like you gotta put this big investment out there ahead of time, right? Before you even know if people are coming, right? That's a big thing, right? And so yeah, that's another example of like courage. It's like, hey, we have this belief that we're gonna host this amazing conference. I know it's gonna be amazing. You guys should be there. It's the Prosperity Conference in March. But yeah, but that's another example of how we are always stepping into that fear, facing it, and with courage, pushing through.
And saying yes
Mhm,
despite it,
mhm.
despite it, and
That's right.
not going to the easy no that feels safe,
Mhm.
but choosing the yes that takes courage. Okay, well, that wraps up our another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. We enjoyed being with you. If you enjoyed this episode, please forward it along to a friend and subscribe to our podcast, and we'll see you next time.